Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here you can find the recordings of the live streams from Airwiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: a sound effect, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, Fmod, Game Audio Learning, Game SoundCon, Kiloheart, Rev Rooms, Soundcut, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and Airwiggles, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Physics Don't Apply in Cartoons. I am Grace Stensland. I'm a sound designer at Sound Rebels Post. Our company has been around for a couple of years, and I'm here today with our two co-owners, Rob and DJ. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Go for it, D.
Okay, hi, I'm DJ Lynch. I've been a sound engineer and mostly a re-recording mixer for, the last 20 some odd years now, I think. And in that time, I've worked on a little bit of everything, but primarily we do animation now. And Rob and I met at the same post company in 2004, and it was a match made in heaven. And we've been working together. We've been working together ever since. One of my first jobs was on the TV show Cops for Fox, and I'd been doing that for many, many years. And so then I brought Rob on to help with that. And so we did that together in a few of their shows for years. And we got to a point in 2018 where we're like, we've got a great team. We've got a great roster of clients. Let's get everybody together under one roof and let's start a business. And we thought let's start a business like 1 year before a pandemic, which we thought would be a great idea. But we weathered that, and so here we are. So
I'm Rob McIntyre. I'm a sound designer, supervising sound editor, and re-recording mixer. I started around 2004, 2005 at the same company that I met DJ at. So I've been doing this for, maybe a little less than 20 years, working on sessions and whatnot. I started in the machine room when we had machine room technicians. Now everything runs itself basically.
Unless Pro Tools crashes.
Unless Pro Tools crashes, and then we just stare at it reboot it until it works. So I met DJ. And I started working with him on Cops outside of the studio. And I started freelancing around town, doing, animation at other post facilities. I started mixing a ton of reality television, which is always a good time, doing independent movies. And then we reconvened at another studio a couple of years later where we were all under one roof. And then finally, DJ and I were like, why are we doing this for other people? Why don't we do this for ourselves? And so he's the re-recording mixer extraordinaire. I'm the supervising sound editor for all of our big projects. So he runs one half, I run the other, and then I mix some of the smaller animated shows that he doesn't have time to do or just require a little bit less time in terms of mixing. And
you guys
still
missed
doing
me signing on with my baby a few minutes ago, so my time has been a bit more limited lately.
Yes. But honestly, he worked really, really hard for many, many years, and so it was actually something I felt really strongly about, of wanting him to take a break last year to be with his son. So now I'm on the other side of that. My kids are now older. I can leave them at home. One's going into high school. So I'm getting my freedom back. His freedom's going away. So, we've been working together. It's a great partnership. And, we've been working on some of the biggest and most watched animated shows in the last couple decades.
We've been very blessed that we've got extremely loyal clientele at most of the major studios, and it's all been repeat business. Like, thankfully, our number one thing is just providing like a fun, customer friendly, service and atmosphere. And thankfully we've been very lucky that like people come back again and again, and the people who do come back have fun shows like Jurassic Park and Kung Fu Panda and Teen Titans and things like that. So yeah. Let's do a quick hello to everybody. Where's everybody signing in from? So we're in Burbank, California. I'm actually at my home in Santa Clarita, but we're in Los Angeles.
I'm actually in one of our stages right now, printing a show while we're doing this. So I'm working double duty right now.
And I'm just in my office. I'm also in the studio right now.
So if you see me just get up and run for a moment to stop Pro Tools, like, don't be alarmed.
Hey, Chicago. That's where I'm from originally.
Hey, UK. I see you. It's much later there.
Montreal,
Brazil,
NYC,
Indonesia. All right.
All around the world. We love it.
Yeah, we're reaching far and wide.
That's so cool.
So I'm from Buffalo, New York originally, so Western New York, so close to Canada.
I am originally from Syracuse, New York. I went to University of Rochester, then came out here.
Oh, nice.
DJ, where'd you go to school?
So I did 2 years at the University of Iowa, and then transferred to the University of Southern California here in LA.
Woohoo! All right, friends. So this, as you've just heard them introduce themselves, this is Rob and DJ. They are both cartoon sound legends, and so we're going to be talking about some of their favorite cartoons. We're going to be talking about what a cartoon is, and how it differs from other types of animated shows that we work on. So without further ado, how do you define a cartoon? What is its signature element?
Well, I guess if you want to go really, really deep, you can go all the way back to the advent of cinema. when
Here comes the lesson.
Yeah, when people discovered that, that pictures would look like they're moving, if you had a succession of them played quickly. There's probably a more elegant way to phrase that. But I've heard a lot of people say that animation is really sort of pure cinema because it is just a series of images, one right after the other. So I think today what most people think of as animation is some sort of like drawn, either hand drawn, computer generated image. Yes, that looks like it's giving the impression of motion. But again, like with the way that live action movies are today, I mean that line is so blurry because so much of live action movies now is computer generated or animated or in some way using that technology or using that technique. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I think in the traditional sense, especially like what we work in, there's like SpongeBob and Teen Titans, which are, I don't think they're hand drawn anymore. They used to be originally, but now, it's all done, in a workstation. But it's a 2D image. And then, then there's like the Disney or Pixar, or again, like the DreamWorks stuff that we work on, which is, has the 3-dimensional CGI look to it. So yeah, I think that's, there's probably a better definition than that, but I don't know. Rob, what do you got?
I've always looked at animation as the one of the most purest form of creative entertainment. In other words, obviously the lines are blurred right now because what we're doing in live action is pretty much limitless, but still with physical actors and whatnot, there's still some limitations. Whereas animation, at least at its core, was I literally can create any character I want. I can put them wherever I want. I'm starting from 100% scratch. There are so much of, I mentioned I've done a lot of reality TV mixing and some live action things. And as far as the creativity, there's a ton of creativity, but there's also some problem solving going on with that. And so to me, animation is such a pure form because you're starting with a complete blank slate. So you can exercise almost every bit of your creativity into its medium. And for a lot of us, it's basically our inner child being projected on the screen because we grew up, kids from my generation grew up sitting and watching Saturday morning cartoons. And so it's I think whenever I'm working on, shows that are geared towards younger audiences, I'm picturing myself sitting in front of the TV as a kid and expressing my inner childhood on the screen.
Yep.
I
And
think it now, there's so much adult animation. Like that's a whole genre that I don't think existed, 20, 30 years ago. So that all of us who grew up doing that can continue to watch cartoons and not feel guilty about it.
so true. I mean, yeah, me growing up watching cartoons, they were the cartoons that you guys were working on. And I think that's
Which is
wonderful. Like,
crazy.
yeah, I mean, I think I started watching SpongeBob, I was probably 5 years old, which was 2005. So DJ, that was, I think, right around the time
Right
you
around when I started working on it.
I started working on it. So that's awesome.
It's a very surreal moment when it comes full circle, like that. When you're like, "Oh, I watched the stuff you guys worked on." And then for me, I was in a recording session once. It's the only time I've really been starstruck because I've done a lot of voice recording. But there was a voice actor in this video game I was recording years and years ago, and I was sitting there going, "Man, why does he sound so familiar?" Like it wasn't a big, on-screen actors. And then I realized that he was like a main voice in the original G.I. Joe, the original Voltron, the original Transformers. And I was like transported back in time. And I'm like, how was I sitting there watching this man do these voices? And now I'm sitting here recording him. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You realize you realize you've either been doing this, you've been in the industry a long time, or you've been on the same show for a long time when there's like a new round of hires on that show, and they maybe come to the mix stage, to just sort of see what the sound process is like. And the first thing they say is like, "Wow, I grew up watching this show." And you're like, "Okay, yeah, no, I've been doing this for too long." But again, you see what the kind of impact that that kind of work has on, and again, we're not the animators. We're, dare I say, just the sound people, but we like to pride ourselves on thinking that especially in animation, because there is no sound to begin with other than just the talent, voice performances, that we're a huge part of that we're the other 50% of that. And that people are, that it helps ultimately to contribute to what has that lasting effect on people and makes an impression. So
yeah, and starting with a blank slate, we get to create a whole new world for something. So with how long you guys have been working in this industry and working on cartoons, specifically on SpongeBob and Teen Titans Go, how has the workflow changed technically or creatively over time?
Well, for Titans, it's been kind of a journey. Titans started off in its inception, a very simple show with very similar to the sort of the Saturday morning stuff, where it was a lot of, very cartoony things. And actually, it was sort of a guerrilla style filmmaking on that show. Is a lot of the editors were just kind of placing sound effects in there, and they really only wanted me and the team to sort of augment what they had already done. So it was almost like a half a job originally. They were like, "Here, you take what we did. We'll do 50% of the work, and you just augment it." And again, there's no composer on the show for the most part. Some songs there is, but it's very sort of. I always imagined it's like a bunch of people in a dorm room making a cartoon, and then once a week there's the resident assistant or whatever, or supervisor that, "Hey, guys, everybody, we got to go over to the mix stage. Gather up your stuff. Let's go." And everybody's everybody's playing games or something, and it's just and that's kind of how it's always felt like. But then as the show went on, they were like, "Wow, yeah, can you replace that? Can you replace that? Oh, that's really cool." And by season 2 and 3, they're like, "Yeah, just replace everything that we've done and do it yourself." And then from there, it's just grown into this. We started doing these Night Begins to Shine and all these different crazy thing about Titans is it's limitless in terms of where it goes. And now it's turning into these huge cinematic battles, and the work is just has grown exponentially on that show from a creative and a technical process, even though the show still remains mixed in stereo to this day, where it started 10, 15 years ago. So in some ways, technically, it's kind of like a time capsule, but creatively, it's expanded over the last 10 years.
How about for you, DJ?
Yeah, so SpongeBob, I'm not the original re-recording mixer on the show. It started at another studio back in '99, and so in 2005, 2006, Nickelodeon was looking to make a change, and I hadn't done a whole lot of animation up to that point. I'd done a few pilots for Nickelodeon, so I was kind of like starting to build a relationship with them. And they just came one day and they were like, "Do you want to work on SpongeBob?" And of course, like you don't say no. And so, I met with Jeff Hutchins, the sound designer, and we got our Foley team together. We had a big meeting. We're like, okay, like, let's figure out how we're going to transition from one studio to another, and like what's the trick to doing this. So of course I sat down and started watching tons and tons of episodes. Up until that point, I've been aware of SpongeBob, but hadn't really paid much attention to it, other than it's like what is that weird show about a sponge? And like my younger sister was watching it. I was like, what is going on? But yeah, and so so we're gearing up for that, and at that point, like, I didn't want to step on anyone's toes, and being the new guy on the team, I didn't want to like reinvent the wheel. And of course, this is one of the biggest animated properties. I didn't want to, of course you don't want to screw it up. And so I was talking to Jeff, the sound designer, everybody, and the music editor, and I said, all right, well, what do you guys normally do? Like, I just want to step in and just, so there's no hiccups, and just keep going, keep the train on the tracks. And, everybody was giving me their ideas about how the show is supposed to go, and how the mix should go, and how it should sound, and all this. And it was like, of course, like overload of information. And the first mix went horribly. There were drives crashing, computer problems. I mean, it was just like literally every disaster you can imagine happened that day. The clients showed up. I was like definitely, in over my head as far as like what I was anticipating, like the actual work was going to be. I'd really sort of underestimated how much work the show would actually require. It doesn't seem like it, but there's a lot of sound effects that go into it. It's mostly removing the sound that we don't need to just distill it down to like, ultimately what the story just needs, to be funny or to get the point across. The first mix went horribly. It was a disaster. It sounded terrible. Like the clients, the producers, I think you could just sense their frustration sitting behind you. And yeah, it was rough. And I said, all right, well, guys, I'm the next one is going to be perfect. I said, when you come back in 2 weeks for the next episode, it's going to be perfect. And in that time, I sat down. I was like, okay, now I've got a game plan. Like, let me build a mix template that I know is going to work. Like, let me set myself up with more pre-mix time. So like really, like not much has changed in 25 years, whatever the show's been on, as far as the actual layout of the mix or the sound effects. Like Jeff and I have worked out like, which sound effects units we have. There's like an A group and a B group. There's like a whole water group of all the bubbles and the swishes and the movement and all that. And there's all the watery backgrounds, and everything is grouped in its appropriate effects units. And it all stays very, very organized. And Jeff is very good about keeping everything, like organized and very easy to mix. And in that time, I feel like I've just made it my own. I mean, yeah, like I said, not much has changed really in how we do it. It's just a matter of, taking the show for myself and just being like, all right, listen, I think the show should sound like this. I know this is what like the brand is supposed to be, but I'm going to give it my own spin. And, I've been doing it since, and I think it's been successful that way. One thing that was interesting is, again, like Rob said, the show started off in stereo, and it was in a 4:3 frame. This was before widescreen TVs were everywhere. And Nickelodeon resisted, once all the broadcasters were broadcasting in HD and in 16:9, and everybody had 16:9 TVs, they still were doing the show in 4:3 in stereo, and they were resisting it for the longest time. And I just kept saying, like, guys, like, why? Like people turn it on and it's just a square in the middle of the screen. And the producer actually said to me, and this is great for animation people, is he said, and it made total sense. He said there's a comedic timing in like the characters entering and exiting the frame, and a lot of the comedy is sometimes in just listening to SpongeBob like walk across the frame with his like squeaky footsteps. And he said, if we add all that extra space like on each side of the frame, he's like, now it's going to take longer time to get the characters in and out of the frame. And that's going to mess with the timing or the pacing of the show. And I said, oh, wow. I said, it's funny that you guys are like holding the format ransom over such a tiny little thing, but it made sense. And I think I like to think that I helped convince them to expand. And then I said, well, wouldn't it be really funny if like there was a scene where like SpongeBob does something and he like runs out of screen left and like runs around the back of the room and then re-enters screen right, and he's doing his like squeaky footsteps and his goofy laugh. And I said we could do the thing where we could start mixing it in 5.1 and you would hear his voice and his footsteps go all the way around the room behind us and come back around and re-enter the frame. And they all laughed. I don't think that was the reason they ultimately switched. I think finally the network was like, listen, you have to do this or we can't continue to broadcast the show anymore. But I thought that was, it really made sense from an animation point of view that they're like, it would literally take like 3 or 4 more footsteps to animate to get the character into the TV safe area of the frame to then now start the scene, And I don't know how I haven't really brought that up with them since. I don't know how they've sort of like dealt with that issue, but the show is still doing its thing and they're animating it. So I imagine they've made peace with it. So
I have tried to push Teen Titans into 5.1, and every time they go, well, we don't need to. It's fine the way it is. And so when we finally did the movie, what was it, like 2018, somewhere around there, 2017? They did the sound at Formosa, and they hired me as a consultant. I actually worked on the film. I was like, all of a sudden, it felt like the handcuffs came off, and I was like, "Oh, okay, now we're going to blow this thing out the box because I've got all this space to play with." And it was really cool. But that's really the only time I think we've ever done that show in surround. So
cool. Well, speaking of the how technology can change what you can do with it. So I'm going to go back to what the talk is entitled, which is Physics Don't Apply in Cartoons, which DJ, that is a direct quote from you. And that is, we were discussing chaos and how in cartoons, you can break time and space. Rob, we've discussed how Robin, the character, can explode, be crushed by a watermelon, launched into space, and otherwise violently injured, and then come back with cartoon logic, right back on the screen. Cartoons tend to have a lot of chaos involved. So what kind of challenges or creative opportunities come with those shenanigans?
Yeah, well, I think that quote, I think I was sort of like riffing on something that I heard Ben Burt say years ago after working on WALL-E. And I was talking to him after a screening, I think it was after like a screening of Revenge of the Sith. And he's like, yeah, like a bunch of us are going to go over to Pixar and work on a show over there. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And it would be the first time that he was working on something like completely animated. Again, if you would argue that the prequels aren't, animated. And then I saw him, I think probably at another conference after that. And he made a comment about how it was an interesting transition for him to go from live action to animation, where everything either moves faster or slower, just either human characters just walking or moving, or again, you've got a character like WALL-E that's, like a mechanical character where you'd be like zooming around, where like, if you were shooting this in live action, like you could only have the subject in the frame doing things at certain speeds, and it, because there's weight and there's physics. Where in animation, it was like, oh yeah, no, it can squash and it can stretch and it can fly and it can, it can do all these things where, again, like I was saying with SpongeBob, getting the character from one side of the frame to the other, it doesn't seem to, you can break physics. And it's at that point, it's more about, again, the sort of the visual, I guess, either flexibility or extra sort of like superpowers you have with animation, when you can do those sorts of things. So there's two sort of like different types of animation. There's like what they call squash and stretch, which is what would be like, like SpongeBob. And then there's, again, like, the animation is trying to be more sort of like, like live action and realistic, like a Jurassic World or something like that. And I think, again, there's still a lot of that sort of flexibility. But yeah, I mean, a character like SpongeBob, you can see him twist himself up and squash and stretch and contort into all these sort of things. And, there's that aspect of it, which obviously you can't get in live action. But again, same thing, like the sound as it applies to those moments, it could either be something, you know, funny and goofy and for comedy, or again, like for violence, but again, still sort of like, comedic in sort of a Three Stooges kind of a way. Or again, in sort of the live action world, something like, Rob and I run into all the time is, there will be a scene where, like in Jurassic World or something, they need to get the dinosaur from point A to point B, and you're like, well, it's a giant T-Rex. Like the thing should move a certain way, and it has weight, and it should, but it's like, well, but they needed to run, or they needed to get from here to there, or they need to just do whatever they needed to do. And we're trying to like time out footsteps, or we're trying to like get that heavy weight, that you would expect to hear, but it's like, it's moving in such a way where you're like, I can't reconcile in my brain like the sound with the image, and so you're constantly sort of like adjusting or sort of like cheating for that, and you just hope that the audience ultimately buys it. But like sometimes, yeah, it can be a challenge, and so I think that's kind of like sort of like what we were probably discussing when I was more or less quoting Ben Bird, I guess.
I think it's important with any of the shows to really, it starts with the world building and figuring out sort of what the boundaries of the universe that you're playing in is. And if it's like a SpongeBob or a Teen Titans, where all bets are off in terms of what the characters can do and the speed in which they can move, or if you're doing something that's sort of trying to replicate quote unquote reality. We've done a lot of these sort of action comedy things like SpongeBob, like Titans, like Kung Fu Panda, where again, we can sort of stretch the boundaries of reality. They can move quicker. They can, and your brain sort of goes with us. I remember when DJ and I first worked on Teen Titans Judas Contract, which was one of the DC first DC movies that we did. And when I spotted it for the first time, because I'm spotting it only with a dialogue track, no temp effects, no nothing, and I was like, man, this thing feels really slow. It feels just so slow paced, because it was trying to replicate reality. And so once I started designing for it, and we started mixing, and we started putting the music in, we realized we had to slow down and think more in terms of, okay, this is reality. It has to pace. It has to move that way. And once we get everything in there, it's going to feel right. But it just feels weird to us because everything, in these other shows are so fast paced. And so you really have to sort of switch your brain, as it were. The other thing is, when you're doing these cartoons where sort of physics kind of flies out the window, is you have to think to yourself, there still needs to be some boundary somewhere. Even with Titans, as ridiculous as it is at times, if I just do whatever I want all the time and just be absolutely preposterous with what I'm doing, not everything's gonna land right. So there's still, it's hard to find sometimes when you watch that show, but each episode you have to sort of find where the boundary is before, so you can push it up to that. One of the things I've always thought about when I'm doing these kind of silly cartoony things where he's getting blasted, or a character's squashing and stretching, as DJ said, is what I'm doing funny because it's just ironic and ridiculous, or is what I'm doing funny because it's funny in the world that it lives in? And that is a really, really hard line to walk, because you could just put the stupidest sounds in there, and sometimes we do that with Titans, but you have to reconcile that in your brain and go like, okay, I have to have some restraint here. I have to think within that. And then when you're doing something that's more live action like Jurassic, when you're looking for that comedy moment and you don't have the sort of bonks and all those sort of cartoon sounds where you're laughing at the actual sound, you have to find sounds within the real world that might exist, be it a squeaky door or a fun something like that, to create that comedy, but grounded in the reality of what you're doing. So it's definitely a balancing act. And with each show, you have to kind of switch your brain. And I find that's one of the hardest things to do with new designers, that when we bring in, is they get comfortable doing a show, and then I'm like, okay, today you're not going to do that, you're going to work on that. And if it's something completely different, it takes them like a while to go, okay, I gotta switch my brain here. Let me rethink that. And that's one of the hardest things to do, is early on in your career, is to just jump from, okay, today it's Teen Titans, tomorrow it's Jurassic World, then it's a DC movie, then it's back to SpongeBob, and just keep genre hopping, and figuring out, okay, where's the boundaries in each of these sort of universes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we work on at Sound Rebels, we work on a bunch of different types of animated projects. Like you said, a lot more live action, a lot stuff that's more, the squash and stretch, like you mentioned. We just worked on a feature film, Orion in the Dark, that is absolutely adorable. Highly recommend if anyone is interested in watching it. It's a DreamWorks feature. It's on Netflix. And there are characters in this movie. They're called the night entities. And so there's insomnia, sleep, sweet dreams, unexplained noises, and quiet. And we get to it's kind of like Inside Out in a little way, where like these abstract concepts we need to make sounds for. So I was wondering if you guys could talk about some of the processes that you went through to dream up these concepts that are not grounded in the real world.
So with the night entities, first of all, with Orion, I always mention this every time I've talked about this movie, is the director of the film was amazing in that he didn't come in with any preconceived notion of what he was looking for. A lot of times, and DJ says this all the time, he's like, it's funny that the things that we win awards for often are the things where the clients are sort of let us just go and do our thing. It's nice for them to have a vision, but he was just so
he was open. He was very open to.
He said, "Look, I just want to see, you guys are the professionals. I want to see what you guys can do. I want you guys to just show me stuff. I have some ideas, but I just want you to go." And so it allowed us a lot of creative freedom to sort of explore, the different characters and what we were doing. And a lot of times when I'm approaching like a character design or a creature vocal or something like that, you go to the sort of, well, it should be low, it should be, it should be bright, it should be whatever. And I try to think of adjectives almost like when you're doing, a board or something like that. You're designing, people who are designing fashion or whatever. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but like I'm thinking of like adjectives that just sort of describe the characters of what I'm looking for. And so what we ultimately settled on with dark and light is that, yeah, you can think of like, oh, deep and low sounds and all that kind of thing. But I liked the idea of dark being heavy, which isn't necessarily always associated with a sound. It can be in terms of pressure, but I was like, I want him to sound heavy. I want him to sound like the weight of night, because Orion's afraid of him. And so we kind of explored what that was. We played with his cloak and how we were mixing that with different sort of sound design elements to make him sort of feel heavy, whereas light felt, very, not just bright light, but light in weight and just sort of, crystalline and going across the sky. And then with the night entities, we sort of leaned into different ideas with sleep. I mean, we used snoring, which was sort of on the nose, but with sleep, it made sense. And then insomnia, I was trying to think like, okay, somebody with insomnia is sitting there and they can't sleep, and it's driving them crazy. And all I kept coming back to was like, if I just had this like humming or buzzing sound in my head, how annoying that would be. And the fact that like it's just like your head just going, it's like, oh my God, I can't sleep. And so that's why we ended up settling he's almost like a fly, but like it's this really obnoxious like buzzing sound that's keeping you awake. And so I was trying to explore the different characters like that. You had a hand in unexplained noises.
Sorry, with insomnia, didn't like when his like eyes were flipping, isn't it like the sound of like,
it's like a, isn't like the tick 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 tick,
like the alarm clock, like the old alarm clock with the numbers that flipped or something that had like that like shutter sort of effect to it?
Yeah, like
I think we were always trying to find things that were sort of, like in that realm of everything associated with not sleep, like you'd be staring at your alarm clock or whatever, like watching the time tick away and things like that.
Exactly. I think we ended. It was like one of those rotary things with the like. I think that's what we did. That I can't remember exactly. I know Grace, we played with some toys for unexplained noises. That was fun.
Yeah, the pop tubes that I found at Target. But like,
I had to got out of my office because I wouldn't leave it alone after we were done playing with it, and it was distracting me. But I mean, that's the kind of fun stuff. That's the stuff that I live for in this. And because we were able to explore and come up with different ideas of the characters, it sort of gave them all this really unique thing. And then when it got to the mix, it really, you know, DJ made it really pop through to where they're all flying around and you could hear all the different things, even with the music going on. Quiet, same thing. I mean, we brought her, I think we brought her voice down, right? Almost imperceptible at times in the mix.
Yeah.
And so it's just this like, we actually foleyed the voice at times where it was just like a squeak toy when she's like walking around and stuff like that. We did fun things like that. So yeah, it was a big sort of exploratory, trying to put yourself into the character, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at that point when it comes to mixing something like that, I mean, you know, again, most of it is the sound design is going to sell those ideas, and then it's the mix's job to then, you know, make sure that comes across and just enhance it and make it sound incredible. And so yeah, with each of the characters, especially when you have like 4, 5, 6 characters all in a frame at once, like you want to be able to, like, as the characters are talking, you want your eye to follow, you know, you want your ears to follow what your eyes are looking at. And so, yeah, it became a matter of like, yeah, like, you know, like picking and choosing some of those sort of those sounds that were associated with each character and just making sure that they popped through at the right moment, either again for a little comedy or to just draw your attention to, oh, this is unexplained noise, you know, talking or whatever. So you would just hear a little bit more of her sort of like bendy straw, you know, limbs, you know, or if she was like walking across the screen again, that it was like that, like you want to be subtly made aware of the fact that this character has this funny mechanism to the way that they move, and you want to draw attention to that, and it's part of the comedy. It's a much more subtle thing in a movie like this compared to like a SpongeBob or another thing like that. But that's sort of the trick in the mix. And same thing, yeah, when they're all sort of like flying around, you know, each of their sort of like flying sounds, you know, have slightly different, you know, tones to them. And so, you know, as they're sort of swirling around the frame and moving past you, again, you just want to get those little accents to pop. So you can just kind of like, you know, for a moment, you just sort of draw your attention to this character and go, oh yeah, wow, they just flew that way into this surround, and oh, what a neat little sound or whatever. And it's just a taste of it, but then immediately you've got to make sure that the audience gets back to paying attention to the story. And, you know, which is part of our job is half, you know, being very invisible, but then in moments like that going, you know, yeah, this is, I guess, am I the only one here now? What happened? I lost everybody. Yeah, you don't want to draw too much attention to yourself, but every now and then you want to drop a little nugget in there that just says like, hey, listen to us. We do cool sounds, and, you know, pay attention to these neat little things that we did. So I think it's just me for a little while. I noticed that everybody is throwing a bunch of questions in the Q&A. We're keeping an eye on it. I guess maybe at the end we'll come back and we'll try to answer a bunch of those. I'm still here. Maybe let's answer some questions. Let's see here. I'll just plow through as much of these as I can really quick. Do you ever miss the commercials during a cartoon episode? Any favorite audio memorable commercials burned into your brain? I'll be honest, I don't know if I necessarily miss commercials. I mean, I think in this day and age where we don't have that stuff because of streaming, or we can fast forward through them, I think everybody has gotten used to skipping over that, or it being, it's like a minor annoyance now. I don't know if there's anything that, you know, that's burned into my brain other than there was probably a lot of those commercials for Transformers and G.I. Joe toys where you'd see the kids like playing with the toys and, you know, doing their own make believe, which is of course designed to make you want to go and go out and buy that stuff. What gets done first, the actor's voice recording or the animation? So it depends. Usually, most of the time it's the actor's voice. They bring all the cast in. at least before the pandemic, they would bring everybody in all in one room. Everybody would be on their own mic, and they would do it almost like an old style radio play, where they just have everybody do their lines, and the director would, give everybody feedback, and everybody be very conscious, just like in live action, to not step on anybody else's voice. So there's no overlapping lines. Occasionally there are some shows where they do just because of the budget or their time constrained schedule, they do the animation first. A lot of times they just have like some people just do like scratch voiceover and just to get the timing down, and then they will bring the actors back in, and now the actors actually have to match the lip assignment, how the mouth shapes work, which can be interesting. Let's see. I don't know if it's just me who's under the impression, but for TV shows specifically, as opposed to animated movies, I feel like the audio sound effects is less heavily designed, present, and impactful in the mix. I wonder if you could talk about that. Of course, Arcane defies the impression, but it seems very present for 2D animated shows as opposed to 3D ones. Yeah, I think it might just be a product of a result of a budget and schedule in television. Like a lot of times, every 2 to 3 weeks, we have to churn out another episode, and we always try to make our shows sound as sort of big and exciting and hyper real as anything you would hear in a live action movie or a Pixar movie or a Disney movie or a DreamWorks film, whether that's animated or if it's, a live action, big budget sort of a thing. We like to try to believe that, like, if you were to listen to one of our mixes in if you've got a 5.1 setup or a home theater or something, that it's just as spectacular sounding. But I feel like, a lot of times the prevailing wisdom in television is that dialogue is king. And so the studios and the producers are very sensitive that they need to hear every single line of dialogue, that a sound effect or music should never be, infringing on the lines. And part of that is because they paid the actors a lot of money to do their thing. And part of it is again, in television, all that audio has to be squeezed through, the built-in speakers in your TV, or maybe you have a sound bar. And so again, it all just comes down to intelligibility. If the audience can't understand what the characters are saying, they're going to tune out. They're going to change the channel. They're going to find something else to watch. Guys who have now just rejoined us, I've just been going through the Q&A and
awesome
and riffing.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Talking about...
our Wi-Fi cut out.
Oh,
Rob and I were scrambling trying to get back on.
So I was just talking about the difference in maybe balance of sound design in the mix between TV and film. Like I was saying, like we go for a feature film level sort of a sound that we want. If you were to play, if one of our shows, they were going to play it in a theater, that it would sound just as good. And I think there's probably some shows out there that are just sort of very light on sound effects and stuff like that, and it could either be budget and time, or it could be just the style that they're going for. There's a lot of, because I have a 1-year-old now, I'm watching a lot of like really, really young, animated stuff, and I'm kind of I'm marveling at how very little sound design will be in some of these shows, but it's very, very effective. Like if they just hit the things that they know are going to tell the story or get a joke. Something as simple as like the character's footsteps, like they're there, they sound appropriate, they're not in the way. There we go. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program.
Cool. So I'm not sure where we left off. I know we were talking about Orion in the Dark. What did I miss?
I think I was talking about the mixing the sounds of the night entities and balancing, just getting like little pops of those signature sounds in the mix, to just cut through so that you're for a moment, we can be selfish as sound people, and we can draw the audience's attention to our work and go, hey, look at this cool thing we did.
Yeah.
But then still make sure that they, we don't take them out of the movie. Because again, we're supposed to be sort of invisible, but not really. Yeah. And then I was answering some questions. So there we go.
I would say, I know that there was one in the chat that I thought would be extremely cool to talk about is, let me spotlight it. I don't know if you already hit this one, DJ. Let me know if you did.
Nope.
Both Teen Titans Go and SpongeBob are very much designed with traditional cartoon sound in mind. If you can speak to it, how beholden do you feel to that heritage? Like the traditional cartoon sounds, or if you want to talk about what your favorite cartoons are and why and how it, the sonic tapestry is woven into what you guys do.
I mean, for SpongeBob, it's there's very much a brand. We have to maintain the brand. There's all sorts of signature sounds that are identified as as uniquely part of that show, and they were all custom designed stuff by Jeff Hutchins. His eye blinks, his squeaky footsteps, like Squidward's footsteps. When Mr. Krabs runs, all the bubbles swishing. The sound of SpongeBob's door opening and closing, the Krusty Krab door opening and closing. I mean, there's just so many things that are signature to that, and then all the sort of like goofy, zany things that happen are all traditional sort of cartoony sort of things,
like the Hanna-Barbera kind of.
It leans into that style. It harkens back to that idea, that original Warner Brothers or Hanna-Barbera sort of style. But there's also a level of realism to the show. We do an entire Foley pass, like footsteps, like there's the sound of every character's foot on the actual surface, whether it's sand or it's the wood floor or anything like that. Every prop that's picked up and touched, has a realistic sound to it. So we can always, at a moment's notice, like decide, do we want to lean into the realism of it or do we want to lean into something funny? How beholden do we feel that heritage? I think heritage on the one hand, yes, we have to maintain the brand. And so there is like maintaining the sound of the show. On the other hand, I mean, there is a pretty big degree of flexibility with something like that, where, it's like, hey, if this is what works, like let's run with it. And there's been plenty of times in mixes where I've just sort of gone off book and done something. I'm like, I think the guys are just going to think this is funny. And, and we watch it and they go, whoa, what was that? And I go, oh, I did this here. I tried this sound instead of that sound or whatever. And they go, well, let me see it again. And it takes them by surprise at first, because they're just, again, the show it's a lot of the same thing, episode after episode. So we step out of the box for a moment, and it definitely throws them for a loop. But then they're like, no, that's like 9 times out of 10. They're like, yeah, that's funny. Let's do that, or let's run with it. So there's a lot of room for, at the end of the day, what's funny, what's going to make people laugh, and but still got to sound like SpongeBob. So it's the same thing with the Patrick Star Show, the spinoff. It's the same thing. It's like it's still in the same universe. It's like it has to sound like it's all part of the same world. But that show actually has like a much more varied sort of like template of sounds to it, to again sort of set it apart from the original show.
Mm-hmm. I just got a notification that my internet connection is unstable. I hope I don't lose you guys again. Just FYI, in case I drop off, that would stink.
You guys are killing us. You're killing us all.
Sorry guys. Rob, what about you?
Well, okay, so this is kind of a loaded question with Teen Titans, but let me try to answer this. So with Teen Titans, obviously there's a lot of some of that H&B and Warner Brothers kind of sounds in there. And if you go back to what I said about when the show started in its inception, that a lot of it was being cut by the editors and the directors, and it was very sort of a guerrilla style filmmaking. You'll notice that a lot of that sort of traditional stuff is because that's what they had available to them, and that's what they grew up watching, and so they put in there and they became attached to it. So whenever that moment, that sort of really cartoony moment, they're like, oh, can we just put that sour plink sound in there that that everybody knows, or the violin pluck or something, or the slide whistle. Mm-hmm. Also, you notice that with it's funny if you ever really look at Raven's powers, Starfire's powers, that kind of thing, they're all very simple, old school sort of magic sounds, because that's what was put in there originally before we started sort of overhauling the show. So the main characters and some of the legacy sounds that have gone on with the series since the beginning are very, very just library kind of stuff, because that's what the show creators put in there, and they just asked us to sort of plus certain things, but that became the sound of those characters, and so we've just kept that. And now it's funny because now you get these new villains and these crazy things, and it sounds so much bigger, but some of that stuff still it's in its old school form. As far as beholding to the brand, that's a complicated question. Everybody knows the original Teen Titans. Anybody who's a comic fan knows the original series of the Teen Titans. And so
Yep.
when Go came out, it was a big controversy. People were mad. They thought that they canceled Young Justice and everything to put that show on. They were mad at the direction. It was a whole thing. There were literally people like protesting Warner Brothers at the Comic-Con, everything. And the thing that I can say about that is I get it, but that Teen Titans Go is never meant to be, it's its own show. It's its own show. It has a lot of nostalgia. It was doing 80s and 90s nostalgia way before Stranger Things ever did it. So a lot of that is to make sort of the generation that grew up with it, who are now parents, laugh at that kind of thing. And the silliness that's in there is for the younger children. So it's like a lot of the cartoon fans got a lot of bent out of shape. So as far as beholding to the quote unquote Titans brand, nobody cared. And it was just like, and that's what pissed a lot of people off, was that they were like, we're just going to do it. We're going to do our own thing. And I think it's also because they kept the original voice actors, so it tied it to the series. But it was a much simpler, just comedy show, and that's what it was meant to be. Now it's kind of morphed back into, at times, a more action-packed adventure show. But there's very little heart or story, complicated storytelling in it at this point. So I've heard both sides of the argument of why people hate it and why people love it, and I get a kick out of it to this day. But all I ever tell anybody is like, hey, you know what? It's probably not meant for us in terms of the cartoon, canon. It's meant for, a parent who grew up in the 80s who has a little kid, or in the 90s who has a little kid. The little kid's laughing at the fart jokes and the parents laughing at the 80s reference, and that's what it is. And yes, thank you. It's DC's longest running animated show.
Woo!
So
Yeah.
I'll
just say real quick. I
saw
saw a question about SpongeBob backgrounds, and yeah, for most of the show, there is, again, it's just that signature like sound, like you're in a fish bowl, like you're in a fish tank. There's like this bubbly underwater. It's not like you're under the ocean. It's like I don't know where Jeff recorded the sound or whatever, but he probably stuck a microphone inside of a fish tank with the aerator on, or whatever you call it. And it is very, it's the backgrounds are usually very sparse. It is usually just that one sound running throughout the entire show. When we go in the Krusty Krab, you hear some restaurant ambience. When you go in the Chum Bucket, there is like this like low drone, but it usually just gets buried in everything. That's pretty much it. It is very sparse. And the idea with it is that like it is just sort of drowned out by everything, except for those moments when you need, like, everything does go silent. There's like the awkward silence, and we could do the crickets chirping thing, which everybody likes to do, and we've done that many times. But a lot of times it is just funny just hearing all of a sudden that background pop up, and you will all of a sudden, again, you're just for a moment aware of, oh yeah, we are underwater, we're in a fishbowl, and it's just this bubbly underwater sound. So sorry, I just saw that as I was glancing at the side of the screen and figured I'd address that really quick.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So, what are your favorite cartoons?
from a sound perspective,
Yeah. I mean, Rob, I know you watch The Simpsons. You have some other shows that I've heard you talk about.
I'm gonna go somewhere where you might not expect.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of the Flintstones. The Flintstones sort of defined that Hanna-Barbera sound, and I mean, some of the sounds in there are absolutely hysterical to this day to me. It's like watching a Tom and Jerry cartoon, which I also love. And again, a lot of that was like live Foley or done by the orchestra, the percussion section, and Hoyt, the guy who did the music. It just hits every single time. Like you get that big slam when they fall into the concrete slab, and it works. It doesn't need to sound real, but you feel the pain of Fred and Barney, usually Fred getting smashed into a door or something like that. And it's just the right sounds at the right times. And so from a cartoon perspective, I love that. I also am a big fan. I've actually made a Facebook post about this at one point, where if you've ever watched How the Grinch Stole Christmas, the original animated one, again, there's some, DJ was talking about minimalist, but like certain sounds. there's obviously the sort of old school sound effects when he's on the sleigh and you know, all those kinds of stuff. But some of the little Foley moments of him shoving the tree up, the ornament falling off and rolling around into the bedroom, the feet in the snow at times, some of it is just brilliant. And especially when you consider when that was done, it's just like, I mean, I know Foley artists and designers now that would have a hard time getting an ornament sound rolling around and rolling through into the bedroom. And every time I watch it every year with my kids, even if they're getting older, and I still look at that and I go, man, that Foley sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously for me, I know it's ironic because I ended up working on the series, but when I watched the first Kung Fu Panda movie, the musicality to the action and the fight sequences was brilliant. I love Eric Adol and Ethan Van der Rijn. They're amazing, and just it's everything the way I would conceive a fight scene in which I have, and I've taken that approach being a musician. But the first time I watched it, I was like, it's one of those movies where like, oh, it's Kung Fu Panda. This is weird. Let's go see this. And I think I went with you, DJ.
Yeah, we went to see it together.
And I remember sitting.
We
there
walked out. We were like, whoa.
Well, and because we went to this little, like, usually we always try to go to a nice theater, and I don't know, I think we were in the mall or something like that.
We were in the mall,
thing,
yeah.
And the floor was sticky and everything like that. And I just walked out and going,
classic movie theater experience.
Yeah, I walked out going, man, that sounded good. Like, where did that come from? And so when I got to work on it a few years later on the series, I was just like, oh boy, this is like a dream.
Yeah, Rob, you won an Emmy, is that correct, for one of your episodes of Panda?
I won a couple for Panda, actually. I think I won four or something like that for Legend of Awesomeness for the first series. I've done all three of the series: Legend of Awesomeness, Paws of Destiny, and the one that we just did, Dragon Knight, whatever it was.
You're talking about the musicality. Talk about the taiko drums.
Oh. So one of the episodes that we won for was an episode where they were doing musical kung fu, and so they had this magic or this power that they could create energy blasts while playing musical instruments. And so I contacted the composer and I said, all right, like, can you send me your music for this early? And so what I did is I took the score and I figured out how to perform all the instruments, and I created patches and like the sound design for this, for the different energy blasts, and then I played them in time with the music, so that as he was playing it, the key of the sound design was matching what the notes of the music were doing. And at the end, they're fighting on this giant taiko drum, and so I said, hey guys, I went to the composer, said, can you give me your taiko drum samples? And I built that into the body falls and everything like that, so that like it became an extra instrument in the design. But just from the musicality standpoint, I mean, you know, if you watch an episode of Family Guy, everybody's watched the chicken fights and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people, and it's the same three punches, which is hilarious. But the thing that I like about the first Pan movie and being a musician and a percussionist, I studied percussion for 5 years, is there's phrasing to a fight sequence, just like you play a piece of music. And so not every hit is the same. And we talk about this all the time. It's like the punctuation to the flurry of punches doesn't work if everything is as big as the last. And so if you think of it in terms of, you know, playing a line in an orchestra, bam, boom, bam, wham, wham, you know, and they have different pitches. And when with Panda, because it's cartoon and fun, you add all these little pitched elements to them. In the first movie, he's like on the ladder. I think he's got stilts and he's moving the bowls. And it's like, it's just so interesting because it's not the typical thing you expect. And so I've always approached action sequences and with that sense of musicality. In other words, we're building a phrase through the scene, like a musical phrase, as opposed to just looking for the impacts or the hits. So
I think really quick, if I can just jump in, I think that's a perfect example, going back to the theme of this whole talk, you know, about the physics of cartoons, is that like you probably would rarely ever see a scene like that from Kung Fu Panda in a live action movie. Like, of course, you know, there's been plenty of like martial arts films where they do really spectacular, amazing things, but like something like that, you would only see like in a Kung Fu Panda movie. And, you know, in like Rob is saying, doing the sound for that, you know, again, it's like the sound for it elevates that animated visual to something beyond just like just being like, oh, I'm just slapping around a bunch of bowls with, with chopsticks or whatever, or I'm just, doing this, a couple of punches or whatever. I think animation gives you that flexibility and the opportunity to be like a bit more hyper real and fun with something, as opposed to like if it was a Marvel movie and they were doing like some sort of like highly choreographed fight like that, it would still need to be sort of grounded in reality. It, like where the whatever the sounds are, the destruction, the punches, the fighting would still need to have the excitement of, realistic violence, as opposed to being sort of like musical and fun and, and something like you would find in a Kung Fu Panda movie. So
I work on a show called Bat Wheels for Warner Brothers, and it's a preschool show, or so they say. And the action is crazy. It's like Fast and Furious for like 4-year-olds. And one of the challenges we had with that was they're crashing into things, boulders are falling down, they're smashing into buildings, etc. But you're doing this for preschool kids. And so how do we make it feel big and exciting, like it's animated, but we temper that for the audience? And so Evan Doctor, who's the sound designer I had mixed the show, but I had a hand in designing with him, there's this really cool, unique mixture of the old school sort of cartoony sounds, but really interesting, really interesting, fun sounds that sort of take the edge off the realistic violence. And so, Joker's van releases bombs, and instead of going ting, 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 boom, they go bomb, ba bomb, blah, 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 bomb, 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 a party favor or something like that. But there's still an impact, but it tapers it just so that your 3 or 4-year-old isn't like, whoa. Because I remember my kids, they would get spooked by loud noises. And so it was a really challenging show, because, you're trying to find that balance, like DJ said. In a live action show, you would never do something that ridiculous.
All right. Let's see. Are there any more questions in the Q&A that you guys would like to address before we start wrapping up?
I'm typing a response to somebody right now.
Oh, wonderful. Who are you responding to?
Okay, so sorry, I just saw Stephen Stewart's question about what's a good resource to learn more about sound for animation, books, etc. What shows would you encourage us to watch? I'll just stop typing and just tell you. There's a great book by Tomlinson Holman, the inventor of THX Sound, called Sound for Film and Television. It was a textbook that we had at USC, and it literally begins with the very, very basics of sound, physics of sound, psychoacoustics, and it goes all the way to, again, how to edit, mix, cut dialogue, do all the sort of very basics of audio engineering for film and TV. And it may seem at times a very, sort of entry level approach. And then at times it can be very sort of like technical, which is, could be a bit of a sort of a difficult read. But I think it's really good in that it distills like all the concepts down to just very like simple, like these are the basics of what you need to do to just sort of get started in this business, or even just be successful at just doing this job. And then, yeah, what shows to watch? I mean, just everything, just like anything and everything, like live action, animation, everything and anything. Like I'm, I don't watch, unfortunately, again, because I got a 1-year-old. I don't get out to the movies as much as I would like to. I still watch a lot of television.
Rumor has it you really love Bluey, if that's correct.
So yeah, we've been watching a lot of Bluey lately, which is a brilliant show. It's one of those moments where I'm angry I don't work on it now. But again, that's a great example of a show where the comedy in that show, the story and everything, it's all about the dialogue and the writing, and and whatever sort of like the lesson of the episode is. The music is really fun. They draw on a lot of classical music, and they sort of like they recompose it for the sort of the style of the show, but the sound design, again, it's very sparse. It's only there when you need it. It just perfectly tells the story. And I'm sometimes I'm just amazed by like just listening to the characters like just walk, and they're all dogs. And so they've just hit on this like wonderful, nicely soft padded footstep sound. And it just has a nice thud to it. And they're nailing in the mix because I hear it perfectly clear through my television. And it's something like that where there's a subtlety to it that I go, that's really well done. And then I think about shows like that we've worked on, and again, we take our approach, which for better or for worse is different. But it's like, if we have another show that we were going to pick up in the future that would be similar to that, I would tell everybody like, hey, like, let's take a look at some episodes of this. And, because like some of the things that we struggle with sometimes is like, we get a new show and we sit down with the producers and the directors and we want to bring to bear like all of our sort of powers of audio to animation. We want to make it as big and exciting and as we want to fill up everything and just give it as much like, dynamism and sound as we could possibly get. And of course, like, you pair it all back in the mix to what it needs to be. And a lot of times, like, it's very easy when you've done all that work and the producers come in and they review it and they go, no, we don't need that. We don't need that. Mute the backgrounds. We're like, why mute the backgrounds? You need that. They have to be in a space, no, we don't want any backgrounds, just mute the backgrounds. And then, we don't want their footsteps there, but like, they're clearly walking across the screen. We can see their feet. No, I don't want to hear the footsteps. And like, and you have these like, not arguments, but collaborative sort of discussions about how, what the sound of the show is ultimately going to be. And sometimes like for us, where, we come from that school of like, well, if you see it doing something, it has to make a sound because that's physics. That's how it is in the real world. And sometimes you need that reality check from the producers to say like, no, we don't really need the footsteps there. Like, it's not important. Because
physics don't apply in cartoons.
It's sometimes it can be very frustrating, but like, you need to let go creatively. You just need to let go and go, okay, let me let them take us in this direction and let's just see where it goes. And it's my job then to make this work and make sense. And so, yeah, a lot of times, like, you see people struggling with like, yeah, I have to, I have to put up with them giving me these, like, what I perceive to be strange notes or could be perceived in the final mix as errors. But then you watch it on TV and you're like, of course we didn't need to hear their footsteps there. Like, why are we paying attention to their footsteps? It's not about the footsteps. And
I think I
went off on a tangent, but yeah.
You're good. I think one of the, you kind of touched on it. I think one of the beautiful things about, working in film and TV and just entertainment as an art form is how collaborative you get to be and how there's so much room to learn from other people. I mean, stepping into my role here at Sound Rebels, I've learned an incredible amount from you. And I think, Stephen, in your question, books are great, shows are great, but also just learning from your fellow audio engineers and fellow sound designers and mixers is really good. Especially from people who have plenty of experience like these two here.
The other thing I would mention.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say the other thing I want to mention is there's that sort of audio nerd in all of us that wants to get excited about what plugins and processing and synthesizers and creative ways that we're doing audio. And I think the one thing that I keep coming back to, especially with people, is when I went to school and I studied music and I studied digital film. But the class that had the biggest impact on me by far in college was nothing to do with production and nothing. It was script writing, because it is really easy to create a cool sound. It is much, much harder to create a story and tell a story with the sound throughout a scene. There's a question here about, is animation somewhere between sound design for games and sound design for films? And there's some amazing stuff being done in games, and especially in game cinematics. But we often get caught up in like, I have to create this really cool sound, and then the connective tissue within a scene, the small stuff like DJ mentioned about the footsteps, it doesn't get thought about enough, of how we tie this together. Again, phrasing through an entire scene, of how does the scene, the rhythm, the pacing, all that stuff play out. And so when you're watching things and you're watching movies, as DJ said, you can pay attention to how good it sounds, but also pay attention to the story, because the story is at its heart. And DJ, you can speak on this in a second about the In the Blink of an Eye book that we always encourage everybody to read. it's
Oh yeah, that's another good one. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about that in a second, but that's you're trying to create emotion, you're trying to tell a story. And so I personally love watching things that Randy Tom has done. I think he's amazing, especially I know he's kind of taken a little bit step back lately, but so, Ratatouille and that kind of stuff. It's just amazing because it's amazing what you don't hear when you pay attention to it, and what the sound designer is focusing the audience's attention on. And also, this is a big one, where you're putting the audience in the scene. Are they a passive watcher? They're watching the scene, or are they in the scene, and where in the scene? And so if they're in there, what are they hearing? And so those are the kind of things that I think, it's really easy to, again, watch Marvel and, wow, that was a really cool explosion, or listen to that car go by, but you're not thinking about how it's playing with everything else in the scene and the story they're telling. Like there's a scene in Orion where, he doesn't want to go to bed, and he keeps telling his parents, can you open the door a little more? Can you open the door a little more? And it's like, I purposely tried to push that scene to where every time the door opens, the pitch gets higher in the squeak, so, it's like, that's
It's
what
like you're
takes
asking
it
a question with
Exactly.
the pitch shifting. And then especially the last one, his dad, like, let's go to the door's closed, and then he goes, "Meow." Like,
Yeah,
you have that story moment. And
exactly.
it's a realistic sound, like you were talking about before, that could exist in this world.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just adding to that next level of detail in the story.
Cool. DJ? In the
I
blink of an
forgot what I was
eye.
gonna say.
And
Oh, yeah. So again, there's another great book called In the Blink of an Eye by Walter Murch, and it's actually a collection of I think interviews that he had done with some students or something. Anyways, I mean, again, Walter Murch is one of those sort of genius filmmakers in the sense that he's both a picture editor and a sound editor and re-recording mixer, and he's done a lot of really great stuff. From Godfather and The Conversation to The English Patient, and all sorts of wonderful stuff. And while his work may not be sort of like the sort of like incredible sort of like crazy sound design stuff that like Ben Bird is known for, he's got a much more subtle approach. So there's this great book called In the Blink of an Eye, and it actually is about picture editing. It's not about sound, but the concepts are applicable to anything you do in any kind of art form. And so we're constantly applying it to sound editing and sound mixing. But it really is all about like distilling. He talks about distilling picture editing down to getting to the story and the emotion of the moment, of the edit, of the scene, of the film, of the moment, whatever it is. And there's a great chapter where he lays out like a series of priorities that when you're making a creative decision, you should try to hit all 6 of these particular things. And chief among them is story and emotion. And if you're making a creative decision, if you're like, I should put the picture edit here, or it should go here, like if it goes here, is this telling the story and giving the audience an emotional response? Or if I move it 5 frames over to here, do I get an even bigger effect of that? And then there's discussing about how like the editing can create rhythm, and of course we have to sort of maintain the eye trace and the 3-dimensionality of the scene in a 2-dimensional sort of frame. But we try to take the same ideas and apply it to sound editing. And again, like if I'm going to choose a sound for this moment, or if I'm going to make a mix decision in this moment, like I need to be doing it because I'm going to be conveying the story. I'm going to be pushing the story along, telling the story, and I'm going to be getting an emotional response from the audience with this particular artistic decision. And the thing is that if I'm just making this decision purely because, this just sounds right in this moment, or this is the exact sound that this car door would make right here in this moment because that's reality, well, that's boring. Like the audience, they don't tune in for that. They tune in because they want to be emotionally moved. And it's like Rob was saying, like, we could take a moment like where, Orion's parents are just like, he's asking them to just, push the door open further and further and further so he can sleep with his door open instead of closed. Like it could just be, the door doesn't even need to squeak. It just could be pushed open and pushed open and pushed open, or it could just be making a generic wooden creak. But the guys, Rob and his team, chose to, well, like let's let's not only tell the story with the sound, let's convey, like, the fact that Orion is trying to, like, get his parents to get him to go to bed, with his door open when we all know that he's too old for this. But then also at the same time, make it a little bit of a funny moment and enhance that with the sound. And so I think that's a perfect example of, like, nailing those first two priorities. And then all the other sort of things on the list are like, well, yes, it is in sync, and it is, it does match the action and all that. And we know that the door is here and he's over here, and, all those sorts of, like, very technical things, which aren't that interesting. They have to be sort of met, but, like, the audience, like, subconsciously, they look at that moment, they go, oh, yeah, I giggled at it. And so we've done our job. And that's any art form, whether you're painting a picture, taking a photograph, playing music, like, every artistic decision you make in whatever medium you're working in, like, that should be your number one priority. Is I should be, playing this piece of music a certain way. I should make a stylistic decision here because this is going to get an emotional response from the audience.
And one of the hardest things to do is to subjugate your own ego about it, because sometimes that comes at the cost of, well, I made this really cool sound. Great, but maybe it doesn't work. And again, it's also a collaborative medium that we're working. We're collaborating. And so a lot of times people think, like, oh my God, I got notes about this. They want me to change something, and that's a bad thing. And it's like, no, it's not a bad thing, because now we're collaborating. Now we're making things better. And so the hardest thing I had as a supervisor was putting myself in that position of, like, okay, this is not the way I would do this scene, but does it serve the emotion, and does it serve the story? And if it does, and I can look objectively at that, I have to look objectively at that. I'm like, okay, then we're good.
All right. Cool. I think that's all of our questions that I had prepared, and we have almost all of them answered in the chat. Are we ready to wrap up?
Do we have any other questions from the Q&A that we want to address really quick?
Yeah, let's see. I think, DJ, you have one about a particular episode.
Can you speak about the specific episode in SpongeBob where Carlo is traveling in time in his little room behind the Krusty Krab kitchen? I can still feel this episode sound, especially the ambiances and the play with silence and voices when Carlo was in the future, grounded in nothingness. This was magical. Okay, I'm going to, this is so bad. I am not familiar with this episode. It's either because, one, I've done so many episodes at this point that I don't remember this one, or two, it might have been before my time. So I'm really sorry. I can't answer that question. So sorry. But it sounds crazy.
That's really cool. I love the use of like playing with silence.
I'll have to look that up. But but again, without really being familiar with it, it's like, that's kind of an example of, like, what I was saying is, like, where, even though it's meant to be a children's cartoon and there are those funny, goofy sounds, like, there's so many times in the show where they do just go wild with something, and it's they're not afraid to just do something, like, really crazy. And maybe, again, it'll be lost on the kids, but for the adults watching the show, they'll be like, oh wow, that was trippy, so yeah.
Awesome. Well, we just got a notification from Greg that we just hit time, so we do need to log off. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, I'm Grace, and this is Rob and DJ, and we're so thankful that you joined on. All right.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for joining from all over the world.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.